Alrighty, here we go, let's boot up Crescent Pale Mist, because that chick which has the slasher smile clearly isn't creepy whatsoever. Crescent Pale Mist started off as a game on PC back in 2006 by the Dojin Circle Classic Shikokairo. The game was later re-released on the PlayStation 3 by a group called Rock and Android with the help of Sony Online Entertainment on November 9th, 2010. This re-release saw some graphical upgrades and character art, which is especially noticeable if you're comparing it with the original PC version. In this game you play as Yuno, a magician who can control a dangerous type of magic known as the Pale Mist. This pale mist appears to be seeping out of the country of Gazukao, and Yuno goes to stop the source of the pale mist, which had been going around killing people, even if she has to fight against her old comrades to do it. So with that, let's go straight to business and begin with the good. I like the general idea of the game. The game is a 2.5D platformer, and one of the notable features of it was the ability to jump into the foreground and background of certain places in order to progress. The game also rewards exploration in the form of artifacts and treasures that you can collect. Some of those items you can even use providing you're playing the game on hard or higher. On top of that, some of them however require some pretty technical moves to obtain, which I'll go over later on. I like the game mechanics. Yuno can attack enemies with her sword to dispel pale mist from them. This is used in turn to heal Yuno and increase the stock of her Pale Mist, or PM for short. It can also cool down her CP, which accumulates when she uses her magic. If the CP bar fills up, a magical explosion occurs which hurts Yuno as well as punish the player for over-relying on magic. However, filling the CP bar has its perks. When Yuno has a blue after image, it means her attacks do twice as much damage at the cost of a 25% drop in defense. At dangerously high CP levels, Yuno will have a red after image. While that's in play, all of her attacks do 3 times more damage at the cost of a 50% drop in defense. Yuno also has an infinite supply of throwing knives at her disposal, which acts as a weak ranged attack, but if used correctly with a high CP, you can actually deal some pretty good damage to the enemies that stand in your way, and even the bosses. A teleport knife can also be thrown, which becomes incredibly useful and almost mandatory in later levels. Lastly, Yuno can also dispel her Pale Mist and use special attacks with it. This can deal moderate damage on all enemies at the cost of her PM bar, which gradually gets to a point where you don't have to worry as much about it. A sneaky way of dealing some early damage with your PM bar that a friend mentioned is that you can simply hold the directional button and double tap the triangle button, but I wouldn't recommend it early on in the game. I like the tutorial segment of the game. It teaches you how the core mechanics work as well as providing some silly banter between a young Yuno and one of the bosses who are both acting completely out of character, all the while being portrayed in a super deformed fashion. If you do pick up the game, I highly recommend playing the tutorial first, as it will make your progress in the game slightly easier and less frustrating. However, no tutorial can ever prepare you for the bad. Now, this is probably just me being bad at the game, but I found myself getting my ass handed back to me on a silver platter for a majority of these boss fights. For this review, I played the game on normal, and I found that even after doing the tutorial, I've struggled against practically every boss in the game. Boss fights sort of remind me of those bullet hell shoot 'em ups along the lines of Gundamonium. It's clear to see that the game certainly requires skill to beat, but some of the bosses use ridiculous attacks taking up a lot of the screen. One in particular uses an attack which draws you closer to the centre of the attack. One false move and you get sucked in for severe damage. When you think you've beaten them, chances are that they were probably just warming up and will prepare to fight you again for round 2, or in later cases even more. Some of the level designs I felt were really confusing. I can understand the need for exploration, and I would feel somewhat spoiled if I were to ask for a map system to be implemented. But levels 2 and 3 in particular are quite large in design, and wandering around those levels if you didn't know where you were going would take a very long time. So be prepared to spend anywhere between 20 to 40 minutes traversing around a long-winded and confusing level. Now remember how I said some treasures required some technical moves to get? Sometimes you might want to use those moves in order to get from one part of the level to another. A good example of this is in fact levels 4 and 5, particularly the latter. This one requires you to master jumping off an enemy to help you in getting across. One wrong move and you fall to the lower level where there's a nice welcoming committee of enemies waiting to destroy your health and break your guard. Dashing off an enemy and using Yuno's roll invalid to propel yourself is probably the best way around it, but be careful as you can run into some pretty powerful enemies trying to get to the boss of Chapter 5. With that, I think we've gotten everything in the bad out of the way, so we'll move on with The Ugly, where I discuss graphics. Graphics aren't much to write home about, and I believe I've gone through a lot of what I thought of the level design in the bad. However, I do thoroughly like the atmosphere of the game, as well as the pretty lights that come out of the boss characters trying to kill me. Enemy designs don't have anything that really stand out. I more or less view most of them as fodder to beat up, or in other cases help me get to places, which brings us to the final thoughts of this review. Overall, Crescent Pale Mist was an alright game in my opinion. There were certainly times where I felt like throwing my controller against a wall, but I think that's the charm of it. You have to continually hit a wall until it breaks down, but in this game's case you break down the wall feeling good about yourself, and they throw a bigger, stronger wall with more layers to break through. However, the feeling of having demolished those walls are well worth it. If a game like this isn't your cup of tea, then I can understand, but if you want a game to challenge yourself and you like retrying levels over and over again, feel free to grab this off the PlayStation Store and be my guest. It wasn't on my PlayStation Store, so I had to grab it from the US store. So if it's not in your store, you'll know where to grab it from. You could also grab the PC version as well. I believe there's a translation available for that too. In all, I would rate Crescent Pale Mist the amount of projectiles I've seen in this game out of 10. Unfortunately, I've lost count of how many projectiles have been fired at me, so it's pretty safe to say that the rating will be a shitload of projectiles out of 10. With that, thanks for watching and stay tuned for the next Infinite Backlog review.